The stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
You're watching GB News with Simon McCoy and me, Ellie Costello. Thanks for your company. Later on this hour, we will have the best of the big question with Dan Wootton. But first, here's a news update for you.
Thanks, Ellie. Yes, I'm Simon Pusey. This is your news at 9 o'clock. The Prime Minister will decide today whether or not to impose fresh restrictions to try and reduce the spread of Omicron across England. Boris Johnson will be briefed on the latest COVID data by Chief Medical Officer Professor Chris Whitty. He'll also consider the current levels of pressure on the NHS. The briefing follows new measures being introduced in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland on Boxing Day. Professor Hugh Pennington spoke to GB News and says there's a lot of pressure on the Prime Minister.
Kind of mini lockdown, people haven't been doing the sort of things that they would like to have done anyway on their own bat, rather than needing, the government to tell them to do it. So there has been there have been many problems for the hospitality industry, and many shows have been put off or cancelled or postponed and that kind of thing anyway. And the need to do more is a very hard decision to take.
A quick warning that this next story has flashing images in it, and that is that new restrictions on hospitality have come into force in Scotland to try and stop the spread of Omicron. Nightclubs are to shut and hospitality businesses will reintroduce table service only if serving alcohol. Social distancing measures will also return to bars, restaurants, gyms and theatres. Stephen Montgomery from the Scottish Hospitality Group spoke to GB News and says the restrictions are taking a toll on the industry.
It's a bit of a blow for us in a month that would traditionally give us most of our turnover, 30-35% of our turnover for the year, to get us through January, February and into March. And as well as that, it's the busiest time of the year. Hogmanay in Scotland is one of the biggest celebrations you'll ever see.
The Business and Energy Secretary is expected to meet with energy bosses later to address rapidly rising wholesale gas prices. The chief executives of major suppliers are likely to ask Kwasi Kwarteng for tax cuts and the relaxation of green levies. Many say they are paying more for gas than they can charge customers. Since the start of September, more than 24 companies have gone bust. West Mercia Police has formally apologised to the family of the ex-professional footballer Dalian Atkinson over his death. The 48-year-old, who played for Aston Villa, died in 2016 after PC Benjamin Muck kicked him in the head at least twice and tasered him 3 times. Monk was convicted of manslaughter and jailed for 8 years in June. Chief Constable Pippa Mills said a police uniform does not grant officers immunity to behave unlawfully or abuse their powers. The Metropolitan Police are investigating a video linked to a man arrested at Windsor Castle on Christmas Day whilst carrying a crossbow. The video, obtained by the Sun newspaper, shows a masked figure addressing the camera and saying they want to assassinate the Queen in a revenge mission. Police say the suspect has been sectioned under the Mental Health Act. More than 165,000 work days have been lost by Police Scotland due to mental health issues. The data, which was recorded between 2019 and 2020, shows that staff and officers suffered a range of issues, including alcohol problems, anxiety and depression. During that time, 68 police officers retired early due to mental health issues. The Scotland Liberal Democrats is now calling for annual staff surveys to identify problems more quickly and provide support. The Texas lawyer who successfully argued landmark abortion rights case in the United States has died aged 76. Sarah Weddington was just 26 when she brought a class action lawsuit on behalf of a pregnant woman. She argued the Roe versus Wade case before the High Court, twice resulting in the legislation of abortion nationwide. The jury in the sex trafficking trial of Ghislaine Maxwell will resume deliberations today. The British socialite is on trial in the US, accused of luring young girls to be molested by Jeffrey Epstein. The jury last sat on Wednesday before breaking for the Christmas holidays. Miss Maxwell denies all charges. That is your news update. I'll be back in around an hour's time with the latest headlines. Now let's head back to Simon and Ellie.
The Prime Minister Boris Johnson would lose his parliamentary seat of Uxbridge and Ruislip if a snap election was held. That's according to a new poll. The Focal Data study for the Sunday Times claims Sir Keir Starmer's Labour would win outright with a predicted 338 seats to the Tories' 237. The reality is that Boris Johnson still has a strong majority of 79 seats, but his popularity has waned after a series of scandals from sleaze to lockdown parties.
Well, let's talk about this with our panel, Polly Mackenzie from Demos and Ali Mirage from The Article. Let's start with you, Polly. Do you think Boris's time is numbered?
I think there's no question it's been a really difficult month. But actually, if you look into the polling more broadly, it feels the slide kind of started in the spring and a sort of slow slide downwards in all sorts of things. Boris Johnson's popularity himself, a sense that the government is on the side of ordinary people, a sense that the Conservative Party acts with honour and integrity, everything just slightly on the slide, and then the last month, boom, off the cliff. What's important to remember is Labour isn't winning this yet. It's the Conservative Party managing to lose it. If you go back to 2019, what Boris Johnson accomplished is he put together a kind of new coalition for the Conservative Party. Traditional Tory voters in the southeast, university-educated people, richer, higher-income people, and a new group of northern, older, working-class voters who came together after the Brexit election, the Brexit referendum, and got Brexit done and supported Boris Johnson. At the moment, it feels like that is fracturing that coalition. The evidence suggests that Boris Johnson is kind of more a Marmite politician than what he's been talked of in the past, a Heineken politician who can reach the parts others can't reach. Lots of people hate him. Remainers hate him. Labour voters hate him. That's been the case for ages. But what's happening now is those new voters, the working class voters, northern voters, Leave voters in particular, are starting to turn away. And, you know, you get in the polling charts the sort of who thinks he's doing a good job, who thinks he's doing a bad job. And the bad moment is when those numbers cross over and the people who think he's doing a bad job outnumber the people who think he's doing a good job. And that has happened now for the first time among Leave voters. And that's quite remarkable. So I think it's genuinely a dangerous time for the Conservative Party.
Ali, the real traction, and many people were surprised it took Labour so long to sort of get traction from this, but as soon as that phrase, one rule for them, one for us, seemed to hit home, and that seems to what has really hurt Boris Johnson as far as the polling is concerned.
I think that's right, Simon. I think Polly's analysis is spot on this. I think it is a series of unforced errors that have really got the Prime Minister specifically and his party into these difficulties. It a bit reminds me of Andy Murray in his first Wimbledon final against Roger Federer. The constant choking, the constant shooting yourself in the foot. And Polly's right. At the moment, the Tories, led by the Prime Minister, are really losing it for themselves. And governments do lose elections rather than oppositions win them. But the thing that Boris Johnson needs to bear in mind is back in 2019, in December, when he won that historic 80-seat majority, he had two factors. One was the public, a large part of the public, were fed up of 3.5 years of prevarication in Parliament. They wanted to get Brexit done. That's been dealt with now. The other one was that he was facing Jeremy Corbyn, who's totally unelectable. Next time round, neither of those two factors are going to be present. Starmer is not the most electrifying politician in the world, but he is credible, stable. He's done a serious job in outside politics as Director of Public Prosecutions, and he has been successful in detoxifying the Labour Party's image, particularly on issues such as anti-Semitism. A lot of Jewish voters are feeling more comfortable now, taking another look at the Labour Party. And that's what he's been effective in doing, getting people to reconsider the Labour Party again. What he has not done, and this is something that Peter Mandelson, the architect of New Labour, used to be very clear about, he has not yet sealed the deal with the electorate. That time will come. But certainly with an 8-point lead in the polls right now, it's very, very good for the Labour Party, and I think they can build from there.
We're just talking about Boris Johnson's popularity, but you know, any prime minister, having gone through the 2 years that he's gone through, he's damned if he does and damned if he doesn't, isn't he?
There's no question. You know, every prime minister becomes less popular as they rack up errors, mistakes, disappointments. That's always going to be the case, and it's certainly not. It's not unusual for a government to be this unpopular at this stage. You know, the Labour Party fell back in the polls at various times. Margaret Thatcher was endlessly behind in the polls during the 1990s. John Major was behind in the polls and then went on to win that 92 general election. So we shouldn't think that just, Labour's ahead, that means, fine, the next election's done and dusted. But it does mean that it feels like it's more in play. We can start to think about various possibilities for what the next government will be, rather than simply assuming it's going to be the Conservatives from here on out.
Well, I also think, Polly, just on your point, I think that despite the fact that Boris Johnson's in some trouble of his own making, I still think it's a long way back for Labour. If you look at where they are electorally with just 200-odd seats, to win that, to form a coalition themselves, to reconnect with their old voters in the north and to win a majority is a huge ask. What I can see, however, happening is that they form a coalition, a grand coalition of the left with the SNP, and the price of that coalition would be that they give the SNP a vote on independence, when Nicola Sturgeon wants. I could see that happening. So the Tories need to be very, very careful here, and things certainly have to change in the next 3 to 6 months if Boris Johnson's going to turn it around. Because if Tory MPs, and at the moment they are in a very febrile and unsettled mood, if Tory MPs feel that they're going to lose their seats, and an increasing number of them will, in fact, even to some of them, to the Liberal Democrats, there could be letters going into the chairman of the 1922 committee, Graham Brady, asking for a leadership election. But we're not there yet. I think it will take a few months to get to that point if we do.
And Polly and Ali, obviously this comes just after the North Shropshire by-election. That was a seat that was held by the Tories for over 200 years, then swung over to the Lib Dems. A pretty remarkable result there that morning. How much do you think this was a referendum on the behaviour of Boris Johnson and indeed the Conservative Party? Ali, let's start with you.
I think it was absolutely a referendum on that. I mean, if you compare that and contrast it to the Chesham and Amersham by-election, which took place a few months before, there were certain local factors in that by-election, HS2 in particular. In North Shropshire, it was completely a referendum on how the Prime Minister was doing, particularly on the Owen Paterson debacle. Owen Paterson, of course, being the Tory MP who had been in North Shropshire for a number of years, and the whole issue around second jobs and sleaze and this panning out and going on for weeks and weeks and weeks. And then the whole issue around Christmas Partygate, how many Christmas parties did or did not take place, the Cabinet Secretary Simon Case having to recuse himself from the investigation because a party may have taken place in his own department, and then questions about who may or may not have paid for the Prime Minister's wallpaper. All of this stuff is a distraction from the serious business of government. And look, to be fair, Polly's right. The last couple of years have been dominated by COVID. And as one senior government figure told me a few days ago, that has really set the government back on their agenda. The levelling up is key. The next 2 years, they really have to be all about delivery. And this is a complete distraction from that task. So I think it was a referendum, and I think he failed miserably. And it's up to him now to turn it around in short order.
The difficulty is where's the backup? Because if he falls back on the, well, at least Brexit is done, it isn't done. And if you're watching in Northern Ireland, it certainly isn't done. Immigration, which everybody said would be sorted when Brexit went through, is not done. In fact, it's a bigger crisis than it was perhaps only a couple of years ago. So there is still a huge to-do list for Boris Johnson, even without COVID, isn't there, Polly?
Huge amount to be done. We talked earlier about public services struggling with capacity problems. We've talked about inflation and the rising cost of living. People struggling in their day-to-day lives or seeing their loved ones on waiting lists for treatment, you know, that impacts people in a completely different way. And if you layer on top of that the sense of sleaze, then, you basically got the recipe for the kind of 1997 disaster for the Conservative Party if it goes in that direction. I think North Shropshire is particularly fascinating because it's a Leave constituency, voted 60% for Brexit, has now installed a Liberal Democrat MP. Remember, the Liberal Democrats went into the 2019 general election promising to overturn the Brexit referendum without even having another one, just say, actually, we changed our minds, we can't be bothered to leave. So for North Shropshire to say they're willing for that party to represent them suggests two things. One, the depth of the anger about the sleaze, but also a sense that Brexit, despite everything you say, Simon, about there still being lots of stuff to do around it, is that it's just kind of gone as a politically salient issue. In politics, nobody is ever grateful for what you've done. It's always got to be about what's next.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, what's missing from the Conservative Party's agenda is, like, what's the big promise? What's the set? What are you going to get if you vote in another Conservative administration? Levelling up? Well, problem with that is nobody still knows quite what it means. The Labour Party hasn't filled that gap in either. Yeah. I don't think we have a sense of how the country would be changed with a Labour government. But that does mean there's a sort of space. There's a debate to be had about, like, what is it that the country wants as a vision for what's next? After this horrific turmoil and anxiety and hatred around Brexit, an awful pandemic. If you want to build back better, which everybody says they do, what does better mean? And that's the conversation I think we need to have in 2022.
Well, I think that's why Boris Johnson has appointed Michael Gove to head up that levelling up department. Michael Gove is a man with full of ideas. I mean, he did a lot when he was education secretary.
Also likes clubbing. That's why you like him.
Indeed. Well, yeah, he does like a good dance. But also, to the point that you made, Polly, I think there are a couple of issues here. One is this whole issue about Brexit was about taking control of the borders. And the migration crisis with over 27,000 people still crossing the channel, 27 people died the other day, tragically. I think that's optically not good for the government. It looks like they're not in control of the borders. So that's an issue. And then also the Northern Ireland Protocol, also still pending.
Ali, Polly, great to see you both. Thank you very much for your contribution this morning.
We'll be back tomorrow morning from 6 a.m. Coming up, we have the best of the big question with Dan Wootton, and then Alex Phillips and Paul Hawkins will take over. But first, here's the weather for you.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Looking ahead to today's weather, and the UK is looking cloudy in the south with rain moving east, but drier and brighter in the north. Let's take a look at the details. After early rain, the southwest will turn drier, although it will remain mostly cloudy with some hill fog. The odd shower also remains possible, and there will be a westerly brisk breeze. The southeast will be wet with persistent, at times heavy rain. The odd dry spell is possible for a time, and it will be mild. South Wales will be cloudy with outbreaks of rain. These will also turn heavy at times. It'll be breezy here, but also feel mild. Winds will be lighter across the Midlands, but it will also be cloudy with some hill fog. There will also be increasing outbreaks of rain, with the odd heavier burst possible at times. North East England will be drier, although still rather cloudy. Some bright or sunny spells are possible towards the north through the afternoon, with some outbreaks of rain possible in the south later. There will be a chillier feel for those of us in southern Scotland. It'll also be a rather cloudy day, but the odd bright or sunny spell remains possible. Northern Ireland will be a little milder, but also rather cloudy. The odd shower is also possible, along with a few brighter spells in the east. It will be rather breezy too. Remaining dry and clear in the north, the rain elsewhere edging east with showers following in the west. And that is how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from